Welcome to what is, I think, our third installment of the VLS Alumni Webinar Series presented by the Vermont Law School Alumni Association. Today, we'll be hearing Playing in the Sandbox, Dealing with Difficult People. My name is Christopher Smith, JD class of 2014, and I currently have the privilege of serving as president of the Vermont Law School Alumni Association. Part of the mission of the VLSAA is to keep all of our members connected, and our members are made up of every one of the over 8,000 alumni of Vermont Law School. This webinar series is one way that VLSAA is working to fulfill that mission. We're excited that you have all joined us today. Also joining us on the call, in addition to so many alumni, is Crystal Brownell, the Director of Alumni Relations at Vermont Law School, Lauren Close, the Alumni Communications Manager at the school, and Brooke Herndon, who is Vice President for Alumni Relations and Development. So they are our crucial partners at the VLSAA and connect us to the school. So if and when you have questions and thoughts and concerns, you can either reach out to someone at the VLSAA or you can reach out directly to our partners at the school. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a couple of housekeeping items with you. First, I ask that you all follow the instructions that were included in your link email to make sure that your display name, which is probably below you right here, has your first name, last name, and your class year. And if you're interested, include things like maiden name or things like that. And you can do this by hovering your mouse over your tile, and there'll be three little dots in the upper right corner. You can click on that, and you'll see the third item down is rename, and you can just rename yourself so that you know, so that we can all see who our fellow alumni are on the call. I also, as I mentioned, would ask that you keep yourself muted so that we can make sure everyone can hear the two presenters. If you have questions during the course of the program, please feel free to type them in the chat. We'll go through questions at the end of the presentations, but please make sure that your questions are in there. If for some reason I overlook a question at the end, please retype it or get my attention. I've also asked Crystal and Lauren to help me make sure I don't miss anybody's questions. And as a personal favor, I'll ask that you keep them to questions rather than comments called questions. And so finally, the last thing is we certainly would appreciate your feedback. After the event, you'll be receiving a short post-event survey, and we would really appreciate it if you take the time to fill it out. It should only take a few minutes, so be on the lookout for that email. So now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our two presenters, Jacqueline A. Brilling and Dawn Wallant. Jacqueline A. Brilling, JD class of 1979, is an attorney, mediator, consultant, specializing in energy and special education law. Formerly, Ms. Brilling was secretary of the New York State Public Service Commission and an administrative law judge to the Department of Public Service. Ms. Brilling has been certified as an impartial hearing officer with the New York State Education Department since 1994, is admitted in good standing to the 3rd Department, New York State, Northern District of New York, and the United States Supreme Court. She is trained in all forms of arbitration, mediation, facilitation, and consensus. She is a graduate of St. Mary's Academy in Glen Falls, New York, Georgetown University, and Vermont Law School. She holds certificates in mediation from Pepperdine University Law School and the National Judicial College in Reno, Nevada. Jackie also involves herself in many nonprofit organizations, is married to Michael J. Horgan, MD, and is mother of 5 and grandmother of 4 children. Last and certainly not least, in my heart, Jackie is a member of the VLSAA Board of Directors, currently serving as secretary. Dawn Wallant has been a certified mediation practitioner since 1991, and since 2011, she has served as the executive director of Common Ground Dispute Resolution, a nonprofit mediation center serving Greene and Columbia counties, New York. Dawn is certified to mediate with large range of subject areas, including family, civil and criminal disputes. In addition to retaining certification as conflict coach, Don also maintains a practice in restorative justice principles. Don received a Bachelor of Arts from Southern Connecticut State University and lives with her husband, Scott, in Fiora Bush, New York. She has been blessed with 3 grown children and 5 grandchildren. Please join me in welcoming Jackie and Don, who will now help us learn how to play nice in the sandbox.
Well, let's hope so. I just want to say that Dawn is a colleague, but is also a very dear friend and a lifesaver in many respects. I was trained in mediation in 1985 because I was deputy counsel to the then Commission on Cable Television and wanted to implement it in my agency. And the person who trained me failed to tell me that in order to pursue mediation on the state level, I had to do an internship, because New York state law, the Office of Court Administration, required that in order to do anything with it, New York essentially, you had to do an internship. And the person who trained me, you know, didn't have any room in her organization for me to do the internship. Well, it took me a while to hunt around. I finally found Dawn, who was the executive director of a mediation center, and I cried on her shoulder, and she said, well, I'm happy to have you come and do an internship at mine. So she saved me so that I could get certified and then, you know, fulfill my dream of giving mediation to my agency. So since that time, we became fast friends and collaborators, and we have offered a lot of mediation programs together. We did peer mediation training offerings. We've done co-facilitation training. We have done consensus training together. We work together on a manual. We've done all sorts of trainings together, and we cried on each other's shoulder when we thought there were injustices in the system. And just Dawn has been someone on whom I can call and just fetch. So thank you, Dawn, for being there professionally and personally in my life. And so it's apt that I would call her and say, can you do this training about difficult personalities and how to get through them in life?
Oh, my goodness. Thank you, Jackie. You know, again, Jackie and I have known each other for many years. We've worked together. We've used each other as sounding boards, and Jackie's been known to take me, you know, away from the cliff often, usually regarding health issues or something other than that, like, what do I do? But she is someone who, you know, from an administrative perspective, putting aside the friendship, which goes back many years, Jackie is the person that we reach out to who can manage the tough stuff. Somebody who has a marriage between the substantive knowledge and facilitative skills, and that's a real blessing in this. She also is someone who I have found, you know, is open to different paths, different perspectives. And one thing that I would like to share is that this field is always emerging with some other way or thought of managing conflict. So again, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for giving me and Jackie this opportunity. And I think with that, we can begin.
Let's talk about the objectives for today. We hope that you'll come out of today with the ability to recognize conflict triggers and how they affect you and others, how to deal with those difficult personalities and situations that confront you when you try to negotiate or reach agreements, whether it be in business situations or in interpersonal situations. Dawn's going to talk a lot about empathy, and we're going to talk a lot about how to communicate effectively to bring down conflict, to de-escalate conflict. We're going to try to give you tools to resolve and manage conflicts, and hopefully talk about creating an observant self.
Oh, this is not advancing. Okay, here we go. So thank you. Very basically, we're just going to be, this is a starting place. I just want you guys to realize that this is an opportunity for you to think about conflict resolution, and Jackie and I could spend an entire retreat processing and building skills to do this. So we're going to base this on the premise that human beings need each other. Okay, we need each other to survive. And in order for that to happen, we have to have good relationships. And good relationships don't just happen by themselves. And we referenced a little bit earlier being observant, being aware, making an effort, and taking a pause. Empathy is a huge factor in how this works. And a lot of this is based on someone by the name of Marshall Rosenberg. Some of you may have heard of him, maybe you haven't. Marshall was a clinical psychologist, mediator, author, and teacher, and he was the founder of the Center for Nonviolent Communication. So when you hear Marshall Rosenberg, you hear NVC, Nonviolent Communication. And that's basically a process to support a consciousness as a method of conflict resolution skills by building empathy. And it's based on an observant self. So I believe that in order to resolve conflict, you have to observe what's happening to you at the moment that you are experiencing this conflict. And it's when we are removed from that conflict gets out of hand and we forget how to manage it. That being said, it's very important that conflict is also recognized as a necessary level in order to create dialogue, to build relationships, and for changes to happen. So the next thing I wanted to ask you is, what is conflict? And everyone hears that, they see that, and they react. There's a trigger, there's a response. Some people are very comfortable with conflict, some of them are not. Conflict is unavoidable. It occurs because we, sentient beings, humans, animals, plants, need to change something that's not right for us. It's based on different needs, different viewpoints, different values, different triggers. And there's something that I don't know how many of you have studied psychology, but it's that the amygdala is something that plays a huge role in conflict and what's happening with conflict. If you think about this, the amygdala is triggered in 0.6 seconds. You have a reaction. So on a very basic level, conflict is defined as a disagreement or a dispute, a clash of interests or ideas or personalities. It can exist between individuals or groups. It can be work-related. It could be personal. And it also can be used in a productive way or in a non-productive way. It can foster diversity or it can damage relationships. it is also something that we can overcome and we can manage.
So when we talk about, you know, reaching agreements, and when we talk about resolving conflict in a group setting, we talk about reaching consensus. A lot of people use that term. Some people know what it is technically, some people don't. Dawn and I offer full day trainings on this, and we don't presume to want to show you, you know, through this few minutes, this is the extent of consensus, because we do offer full day trainings on consensus. And I apologize in advance for just breezing through this, because this is a big deal, but we are going to just breeze through it. So sorry. But consensus is a decision-making process where essentially a group of people come together and say, we have a problem. How can we reach an agreement where we can all live with the decision? Okay. Now, typically it was Native Americans or Quaker communities, or even the town hall meeting in New England, where people would come together in a large group and say, we've got this problem, let's talk about it until we can come to more or less a unanimous decision about how we're going to solve it. All right. Now, that doesn't mean there weren't dissents. There might have been dissents, but basically that meant, as a premise, there was a respect for the diversity in the room. Everybody there was on an equal footing. They got to share their opinions openly, and you checked your ego at the door. Everybody was treated equally. Okay, so how do you do that technically? Somebody would tee up the problem. You would present it or the issue. And that means technically that there has to be an open sharing of information, because if you don't, then that means that somebody's there in the dark and they can't participate fully and equally with everybody else because they don't know what's going on. That's an antithesis of the consensus process. Everybody has to be there equally represented, and you have to be there fully participating, or it's not a consensus process. Okay, so that means whatever information you need, it has to be presented for everybody. Okay, and then you have to clarify so that everybody's there understanding what's going on. So you present the problem, you clarify the problem, and then you discuss the problem. And you go around and around and around and around, and you discuss it fully so everybody knows what's going on and everybody has had an equal opportunity to discuss it. And then you take a pulse. Do you have a solution after having discussed it? Has some kind of a solution emerged from the discussion? If so, are you ready to maybe adopt a solution? Maybe with some dissents among those, present? Because remember, it's more or less unanimous. If so, maybe you can adopt whatever the solution that's bubbled up. If you implement it, that's fine, but part of the consensus process is you have to come back and evaluate. Because remember that an essential piece of consensus is that everybody who's there has to be able to leave saying, I can live with what we agreed to. And another fundamental fundamental piece of consensus is the Voltairean perfect is the enemy of the good. But in reaching an agreement in a group setting, there may be one or more people that, for whatever reason, may be blockers. Now, in consensus training, they teach you how to deal with blockers, you know, fist of five. There are always those. Again, we give full day trainings on how to deal with this, but there may be a philosophical difference or a cultural difference that's maybe a person can't deal with whatever's happening at the moment. And as a person who's trying to lead an agreement or facilitate agreement, you need to be able to deal with these philosophical or cultural differences. You need to find out what's happening and draw out the differences and make sure that they're explained to others understand them. There may be illness. Somebody might not just be feeling well that day, whether it be physical or emotional. There may be a persistent failure to understand the issues or perspectives involved. And again, that's a facilitator's responsibility to figure out what those failures are and to draw them out and to make sure there's an explanation. There may be just a nitpicker. And that's another tool, is a caucus. Draw that person aside and say, okay, how can I help you? Let's figure out what the problem is. How can I deal with the one issue that's preventing blocking? But there are these personalities involved that can stop consensus from moving forward. Dawn?
Yeah. So, you know, one of the things that I'm hoping you're noticing as Jackie is talking is that there's something that is preventing moving forward. And this might be something that is very difficult for you to realize, that you have a role in how to make something happen, how to make it move forward. And one of the foibles is to take what's happening personally, to not being able to stop for a moment and to observe what's happening, such as the nitpicker. You may just see this person as a nitpicker or someone who is failing to understand. The single issue person, bear in mind that when you are working in groups, or when you're working to build consensus, or where you're working between two individuals and helping them communicate, there's something that may be an immovable piece for this person. And when that happens, it's usually a value that this person is holding very deeply to his or her heart, that is preventing them from seeing the bigger picture, from preventing them from moving forward. And when that happens, you will have a problem. Even if you're able to clarify the value, help identify the value, if there is a deep single purpose that someone is holding dearly, that they cannot move forward on, that is going to prevent you from reaching an agreement. So it's important for you to be able to reflect back what you're seeing and get that value out into the open, and either manage it or not manage it by the person understanding that this value is something that either cannot be changed, in which case that will have an impact on the entire group dynamic. The other issue is habit. There may be an habitual pattern that somebody is following. And then this is something that's really important. And I think that Jackie has found this to be true in the kind of work that she does specifically with special ed, protecting prior decisions or statements, regardless of how appropriate that might be. And these are the kinds of things that can impact whether or not there's something that can be changed or can be made, regardless of how appropriate that might be. The final thing I wanted you to look at is something called unmet needs. And that, barring an obstruction that cannot be negotiated, is the key for you, is to try to understand what the unmet need is that is preventing people from moving forward. And realize that you also have these unmet needs, which might be obstructing your ability to be able to identify what that person might be needing by taking a comment or a response or a reaction personally that that person may have been saying, or persons might be saying in the middle of the discussion.
So I just wanted to say before we move on to the next slide that with respect to the single issue, I had something like this happen to me in a huge mediation. I had 239 parties in a negotiated rulemaking, which is a very large consensus rulemaking. And the parties were Communication Workers of America and Bell Atlantic. They were stalemated on one issue. And it was the definition of the workday, which we had tentatively, well, you know, Bell Atlantic had proposed 8:30 to 5 p.m. and CWA opposed it. And I couldn't understand it. It went on for a month. CWA blocked it for a month. And I just kind of moved on to other issues, and this is while I was a judge at the PSC. I moved on to other issues. Well, of course, we were coming to the end of the line. We had the whole rulemaking done, and that issue remained. So finally, I called them both into my office. I said, 5 CWA on one side of the room and 5 Bell Atlantic representatives on the other side of the room. And I said, okay, I can't let this issue go on any longer. I don't understand what's blocking. It's a pretty straightforward problem here. I mean, what's the problem with the definition of the workday? I looked at CWA and unanimously in one word, they answered me, lunch. Lunch. So we redefined the workday from 8:30 to noon and 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. The problem went away. And we presented the whole rulemaking to the commission. CWA endorsed the whole rulemaking. And there you go.
And that was an unmet need, hunger. Oh, I'm kidding.
That was, you know, not only that was their single issue, that was their unmet need, and that translates to the next slide. It was also, you know, my next thing was ascertaining interest versus position. Their position was they were blocking the rulemaking, the whole rulemaking. I mean, hundreds of issues were on hold because of this one issue. They were blocking the whole rulemaking because of their interest was to provide, I mean, I assumed that within the workday they were going to take lunch, but nope, they wanted it specified that lunch was specified in the definition of the workday. I mean, my workday was, you know, 8 to 4. Nobody specified that my lunch, you know, was provided. It's just, you know, goes without saying that you take lunch. In any event, I mean, their interest was met, and I set them aside. I caucused with them. I ascertained their interest versus their position. I mean, that's what you have to do. You have to try to get underneath, find out what their interest is versus their position. Now, the classic example in the mediation business of interest versus position is the mom who has one orange and she has two daughters who want it, okay? And she can just play Solomon, split it in two, give half to each. All right, so each daughter gets 50% of what they want. That is one way to handle it. But if the mom tries to ascertain what the underlying interests are, or another way to say it is root cause, she can find out that one daughter wants the rind because she's making a cake, and the other daughter wants the pulp because she wants to make orange juice. In this way, both daughters can walk away with 100% of their needs met, and by ascertaining their underlying interests, okay? So that's a classic example. You know, the other thing we try to do is to determine root cause of differences, you know, and in which case, remember your own triggers. Now, we all get, you know, antsy if we haven't eaten. I should have thought of that. I should have thought, well, these guys, you know, they're up on posts, they're working hard, they're like underneath desks, doing electrical work. I should have thought of that for the communication workers of America. Yeah, they're going to want to make sure that their members have a lunch break. I should have thought of that. I should have thought of my own triggers, and if I had, I would have thought of their root cause. So I think it's important to remember what triggers you when you're dealing with other parties that might be, you know, what's making them, you know, act in this manner. And, you know, it's so important to seek perspectives of everybody for a lot of reasons, most important of which is to avoid power imbalances. And, you know, Dawn will back me up on this because this is an ethical issue. Whenever you mediate, you want to make sure you always have to level the playing field. And most importantly, when you're trying to get a group agreement, you don't want anybody in there who is going to be more heavily weighing their opinions in trying to get an agreement than others. Everybody should have an equal voice. So you always want to seek everybody's perspective equally.
Yeah, that's very true. Again, you know, sort of skipping to the next one, jumping ahead to the unmet need in the behavior. And Jackie did mention the importance of balancing that playing field. And one of the key elements of inviting people to speak is asking questions, trying to empathize and understand, ask what might be going on. Usually, if someone is silent, that is because the person is generally feeling disempowered, and you might be able to get sort of a false tacit approval of something where someone might not be openly objecting to something or openly arguing with you, but the fact that they are not bringing forth any of their own ideas or any of their own wishes is usually a key indicator that they're not satisfied with what's being said or determined. And again, that can be a different type of difficult person. The silent person can be just as difficult to interact with as the more vocal person. One of the things that's very important to do while you're trying to deal with a difficult person is to not take what's being said personally, how hard that is. And again, going back to Marshall Rosenberg, he will say that the reason why people say what they say or do what they do is because there is an unmet need that has absolutely nothing to do with you. And then we're gonna explore that a little bit later in the next slide. So I'm just going to briefly mention it here. The other thing that is important is to take responsibility for your inability to handle behavior, both yours and the other person's. So acknowledge that you are having a difficult time managing this and take responsibility for that. Another way to manage a difficult person is to be flexible. Flexibility diffuses conflict almost immediately, to step back and to try to see maybe there is another way to do this and to find common ground. There are two approaches to this. One is a facilitative approach, which says you try to get agreements or manage the difficult person with low-lying fruit. What are we agreeing on? And then there's another way, which is to reflect back the negative and to point out what's not being agreed to. That's called a transformative approach. And what you'll do is you will literally reflect back exactly what you're seeing. So that has the effect of kind of startling the other person and saying, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying, and this is why I'm saying it. So a mediator often will use both of those approaches, unless you're a true transformative mediator, in which case you will never be facilitative whatsoever. Again, Jackie and I, we could do this for a long time, so I won't go on. The next slide is feeling. And
before Sarah, I just wanted to give an example of you know, the feelings. Dawn trained me in community mediation. We did child custody visitation. We did a lot of mediations where feelings would run very high. You know, when you're talking about your child and who gets custody of your child, you're thinking feelings are going to be running really rampant. And so when I took the job as a judge at the PSD, I thought, oh, okay, well, good. This will be a job where I probably won't have situations where feelings will be running high in these mediations. Little did I know, one of the first mediations I had, I had 20 people in the room. I bent down to pick up a pad, and I looked up, and two of the parties were engaged in, you know, one of them had the other one by the cuff of his collar, and I was shocked. And so I instinctively drew myself up to my full 5'5" and a half inch frame, put my hands on my hips, and I said, "You're just like my kids. I look away for 1 second and look what happens." And they looked at each other, and they looked at me, and they started to laugh, which goes back to my basic tenet that if you can diffuse a situation with humor, you should do it at all costs. Thank you for letting me share that episode.
Oh, thank you, Jackie. So, you know, this is a very, very partial chart. It's courtesy of Marshall Rosenberg. And if you look at the chart, you're going to see these are just typical feelings. And too often when people talk about their feelings, they use verbs instead of adjectives. They use action words rather than really describing a feeling. And the feelings, whether they're good feelings or bad feelings, are associated with a need, either a need that's been met or a need that has not been met. So you can actually draw connections between all of these words and these basic needs that we have. And I'm going to say something that I want you to think about, and I hope it resonates for you. And this is something that Marshall Rosenberg has said, which is every criticism, judgment, diagnosis, and expression of anger is the tragic expression of an unmet need. And if you bear that in mind when you are dealing with difficult people, you will be able to step back and observe not only what is happening in yourself, but what is happening with the other person. And an example that I can give with this is, recently I participated in a workshop, and someone thought about a very minor interaction that he had with this one individual. And it had to do with a workshop that this person was taking. And he wasn't particularly happy with it. And he said, to his colleague, said, well, what did you think about that? And this person responded and said, I was really disappointed. I didn't like it. At which point his colleague got very angry with him. And he wasn't even the person doing the workshop. And he said, what do you mean? I thought it was great. How can you say that? So you had one person who was immediately angered, another person who was, what was he feeling? He was feeling hurt. He was feeling surprised. He was not understanding what provoked this response. So what can be learned by this? What kind of observation could be made by that? The observation that perhaps one was just speaking honestly and saying, well, I didn't particularly like this. I didn't get anything out of it. What was that person looking for? That person was looking for agreement, acknowledgement. Yeah, my feeling is right. This was a crummy presentation. The other person took it personally. They both took it personally. The other person was looking for affirmation. I agree with this workshop. I think this person did a great job. How dare you insult this workshop? Why? Because not only were you insulting the presenter, but you were insulting me. So that's how conflict happens. There's judgment. There is an order. You should like this. You should like that. How dare you say that? So what we do is we have to observe where we are and what we're saying in the middle of that conflict. And that's why Marshall Rosenberg says the best way to resolve conflict is to be an observant of yourself. Think about why you were triggered, where you were triggered, what were your expressions, what were your gestures, what was your emotion. And you are in the middle of a very upset emotion. If we take that and turn it around and look in awe of ourselves, oh, wow, look at just what happened to me. I was really mad. And if you take that same energy and turn it on a positive for yourself, smile at yourself, wow, now I want to take this type of energy and apply it to something positive. I want to know what was my need? What was I feeling? What could this person have been feeling that precipitated this response that happened to me? The other thing that is really important that we do is we pause. Because if we don't pause, we're just going to continue to ratchet it up. And again, what do feelings have to do with it? Just about everything. Again, it's that amygdala. It takes 0.6 seconds for that to happen. So it's really important to be an observer. And remember, what are you needing at that moment? And if you think about the example that I gave, most people are feeling angry because they are feeling flawed. They're feeling fearful that they are not going to be accepted. They need to be, they're feeling possible rejection. And again, these feelings of need of acceptance, of feeling flawed, these are very basic needs that are being triggered in you that you're not even aware of. And again, this is true with your adversary. Don't assume anything. Like Jackie gave the example of, you know, what could you possibly assume about needing an orange, or what could be possibly missing from this? So never assume anything. And the way to get past assumptions is to be non-judgmental and to ask those questions. Reflect back what you are hearing and seeing. Again, I think I gave you, an example of how that would work. And ask questions. Always ask questions. You're never going to find out what's happening, and you're not going to be able to ask those questions until you have become more an observant self. Use I statements. There's nothing more off-putting and defensive than a you statement, and they're hard to say. And an I statement, we've all taken them. I feel blank when you do this because blah. The other part that's really important in conflict resolution is clarifying to make sure you understand. Don't assume.
So, I've recently read this book called The Socrates Express, and it's about how philosophers can help us in everyday life, and some really great tips have emerged. Obviously, Socrates plays such an important role for all of us lawyers. We learned all too hard, the Socratic method. Watch out, the questions are coming your way. But mediators do that too. We've learned, obviously, the beauty and the wisdom of asking questions. Good questions help you reframe the problem. You see things from an entirely different light. And, they help you change the assumptions. The philosophers were all outliers. Well, heck, Rousseau was drummed out of his town. Well, of course, we know what happened to Socrates. Let's not go there. But most of the philosophers were so because they didn't assume, as Dawn said. They questioned basic assumptions. They thought of things in a different way. I think they said Thoreau used to turn around and look at things from between his legs so that he would really see the world from a very different perspective. Of course, they forced him to live in a mosquito-infected pond, but that's another story. But they did look at things from a different perspective, but they asked a lot of questions, which is what we should be doing. Because, well, why? When you ask questions, you think about things from a different perspective, what happens? Different solutions bubble up. And you think about things from a different way. And what's that all about? That's about diversity. That's what we should be all about now. Looking for things in a diverse way, respecting diversity. It treats us all to respect diversity, and that's what we should be all about. Now, Marcus Aurelius, who was another called the philosopher king, he was kind of comical if you read about him. He didn't want to get out of bed in the morning. He wanted to lounge late in the day. He wanted to stay in bed and think about life for a while. And he said, look, every morning there are going to be people that are meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, jealous, and surly. But what goes on in their minds can't hurt you. Nothing that goes on in their minds can hurt you unless you let it. You have to disempower them. You have to revoke their license over your life so that they can't hurt you. And that's really what we've been talking about all along. Don't let those people empower your life. You have to disempower them. And then The other interesting thing, you know, that the philosophers talked about in this book is the porcupine dilemma about relationships, which is kind of interesting. You know, what do porcupines have? They have this kind of natural defense mechanism in life. They approach each other and they have to retreat, approach and retreat until they find this kind of proper distance from which they can tolerate each other. And humans are like that too. You know, we need each other, but we hurt each other. And we kind of have to, in our relationships, kind of have these natural course corrections until we can find the distance at which we can tolerate each other in life. But even the most skilled navigators get, you know, pricked every now and then. And that's what life's all about when you deal with these difficult situations and dilemmas in life. You know, you just have to, it's a series of course corrections. And that goes back to what Dawn said about don't take it personally, because you're going to get pricked as you navigate along. And again, I urge you to read this book, The Socrates Express. It was very enlightening for me.
So, whoops, we are running a little late. We want to be mindful of time, so we're just going to kind of breeze through these. Remember, when you try to manage a difficult person, you move into a position of trying to make something happen, and that will automatically put you in a defensive position. We don't manage people, we manage conflict. And there's always going to be conflict, and it's how we manage the conflict, not the person, that is a critical piece to this puzzle. Difficult people present opportunities and should be viewed as a stepping stone rather than a stumbling block. As Jackie said, see these differences as opportunities to change something. It's to change something that's bad from hopefully something that's good. It's very important to be gentle with yourself when you are approaching conflict. Smile at yourself. Use that understanding to smile at yourself, which opens up your heart for empathy. If you can't do that, then you're going to be stuck. Resistance can block creativity, and your sense of humor can hinder problem solving, and only you can perpetuate or relinquish it. Circumstantial problems can cause people to present themselves in a way that's a positional presentation, and they can behave in a way that is discourteous. So that's, again, that's just a front. There's a reason usually behind that type of affectation or presentation of themselves. And again, it's very difficult to build trust in that behavior. So you have to figure out, how do I knock this down? What's really going on? Why is this person needing? What is this person needing that's making him or her or me from presenting this way? Managing yourself and your expectations to stop ugly patterns from continuing. Again, that is creating the observant self and empathy in negotiation.
So hopefully we have covered that, you know, consensus tools can help you reach an outcome that everyone can live with when you're trying to, you know, establish a group agreement, or even, you know, even among your family. If these difficult personalities emerge, you should try to separate the behavior from the person. Try to understand needs and not the position. Be empathetic and observe. Try to manage your own emotions and expectations and build rapport. Try to find common ground and be flexible. Always have a sense of humor. And remember that there should always be a creative sense of tension. If we were all the same, we'd all be wearing gray. no creative solutions would bubble up. You know, everything would be the same. And that's how we have, you know, that's what's called diversity. And in this day and age, we need that. And we should be respecting that. Reframe the question, disempower the person, and always try to view difficulty in either the person or the situation as an opportunity rather than an obstacle. And Dawn, you're going to progress?
Yes, sorry about that.
And in whatever language, grazie, merci, danke, obrigado, dziękuję. Thank you for having us. Thank you for joining us. And next slide. Hopefully we're not leaving things murkier than when you joined us, but if you have any questions, we're here for you.
Thank you so much, Don and Jackie. That was really great. Just to remind folks, if you have questions for our panelists, please enter them in the chat. I do have one question so far, so I'll read that one aloud while other folks take the opportunity to put their questions in the chat. This question comes from Jordan Carpenter, class of 2016. What happens when, after considering and applying all these things, my first attempt at breaking through an impasse with a difficult person is unsuccessful? Is there some form or some type of escalation strategy?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Are you in a group? You can, there are a lot of things you can do. I would say your first attempt at trying all these things, you can caucus. I mean, that would be one thing that I would suggest too. You can always caucus, take the person aside and say, okay, let's talk. You know, if you're trying to ascertain needs, you can always caucus. That's one of the things that I do. A caucus is a private conversation that you have outside of the big group to find out exactly what's going on with the person. And, you know, find out exactly what the needs, because sometimes you can't, it's hard to ascertain what the needs are in a big group setting. And you can ask more pointed questions in a caucus setting. Dawn?
Yeah, I was also going to say, again, it depends on what the circumstance is, but one of the things that usually is very powerful is if you really mirror, reflect back what it is that you hear this person saying, and even if it's negative, you put that, you repeat those requests or those statements, and say, so, you know, I'm hearing, is this correct? What do you know, what do you want to do about this? What are you asking? You know, what is it that you are asking by saying these things? So rather than avoiding saying things that might be negative, you reflect back like a mirror exactly what you're seeing. So again, it depends on the context. If it's interpersonal, you can say that right to the person, providing it's safe. If you're facilitating the conversation and you are mediating, you can still do that in open session, or as Jackie said, you can do that in caucus. But I always find it helpful to reflect back, you know, what exactly is happening, rather than just trying to find areas that may or may not be of agreement, because those are kind of, you know, somebody is being that difficult, having that much of a difficulty of coming to an agreement. The areas of agreement are less important to that person. The areas of disagreement are more important. So I don't know if that helps. Any other questions?
Currently, we don't have any additional questions. So unless I see one pop up, we can work on wrapping things up. Thank you again, both Jackie and Dawn, for your presentation today. I found that very helpful. Thank you to everyone else for joining us today. I just want to note before we leave that we have 2 more upcoming virtual events that we hope you can join us for. The first one is on October 8th, our annual Lex Pro Urbe et Orbe event. This time will be done first time ever as a virtual happy hour. So we hope you'll join 5 alumni, faculty, staff hosts, and many fellow swans for some fun. Please don't mind my dog and her, what sounds like a smoker's cough in the background. Second event coming up is the next installment of the VLS Alumni Webinar Series titled The JAG Corps, covering the continuum of legal services. We'll learn interesting facts about military justice, as well as an overview of the military justice system, the role of staff, judge advocates, operational law, and the path to becoming a judge advocate, all from VLS alumni panelists who are affiliated with the armed services. For example, did you know that only 3/4 of a jury must agree for a guilty conviction in the military? We'll learn more interesting facts like that at that panel. You definitely won't want to miss it. You can register for both the upcoming webinar and the Lex Pro Urbe et Orbe event by going to VLS Connect, which someone should be sharing the link to VLS Connect in the chat. And it would not be me if I did not say, while you're at VLS Connect, if you have not already done so this year, or heck, even if you have, please think about contributing something to the school. As I always say, it matters as much how many people give as it does how much each person gives. So with that, I will thank you all again for joining us today. Thank you, Jackie and Dawn, and I hope everybody has a great day and stays safe and healthy.